A clear message from the next Commander-in-Chief on his intentions for Guantanamo Bay and its prisoners. President-elect Donald Trump tweeted, "There should be no further releases from Gitmo. These are extremely dangerous people and should not be allowed back onto the battlefield." The comment was made as Obama pushes through the release of more detainees in his final days in office. During his campaign, Trump spoke against closing the prison.
We're going to keep Gitmo, we're keeping that open, and we're going to load it up with bad dudes.
As Trump gets ready to enter the White House, it seems likely that Guantanamo Bay's days may no longer be numbered.
To witness the signing of this executive order.
It was Obama's first promise after taking office.
There we go.
To remove one of the biggest stains on America's modern history. Established to detain so-called enemy combatants after 9/11, Guantanamo Bay has been the site of human rights abuses and torture, with the vast majority of detainees held without charge or criminal trial.
I was being detained and I didn't know why. I didn't know what they had charged me with, but I was in a cell for no reason.
The torture inside the interrogation room, nobody can hear what's happening there, because you cannot see, it's isolated. But sometimes you can hear some people screaming.
At its peak under President George W. Bush, Guantanamo Bay held more than 700 detainees. Congress blocked Obama from transferring them to facilities within the US. But under his watch, 179 prisoners have been moved to 42 countries for repatriation, resettlement or prosecution. 19 more are due to be released before Trump's inauguration on January 20th, leaving 40 detainees inside Guantanamo Bay and Obama's legacy with an unfulfilled promise. Supporters of the Guantanamo Bay prison point to the detainees being a potential security risk.
These are literally enemy combatants, in essence soldiers, though not soldiers, terrorists, of foreign terrorist organizations, many of whom, as soon as you release them, they rejoin the fight against us.
US officials have said around 30% of those released have returned to the battlefield, but Obama's administration says that's lower than recidivism rates for federal offenders, and that keeping Guantanamo Bay open actually fuels terrorism.
I continue to believe that Guantanamo is a recruitment tool for terrorist organizations.
If Trump makes good on his intention to keep the prison open, what impact will it have on the nation's security? And will America's shame live on? Yvette McCullough, The Newsmakers.
To discuss this, I'm joined by Muazzam Beg in Birmingham. He was detained at Guantanamo Bay for almost 2 years. He's now the outreach director of the advocacy organization CAGE, which says it works to empower communities impacted by the war on terror. And from London, Charlie Wolf. He's an American political commentator and was formerly the communications director of Republicans Abroad in the UK. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Charlie, let me start with you. Donald Trump says there should be no further releases from Gitmo. These are extremely dangerous people and should not be allowed back into the battlefield or onto the battlefield. How does Trump know? How does he know of these individual cases and if they're all guilty?
Well, you just have to listen to what Barack Obama said in the very beginning when he said he wanted to close it down. I remember he put in the caveat, the clause of saying, of course, there are some in there that we'll never be able to release. So obviously we do have some of the biggest terrorists and masterminds, et cetera, that were in that war, and they will always be a danger. And you know, unless we can find a way that we can safely bring them somewhere else, we'd like to, but it's not possible, so they will stay there. And I don't see them going to the States because the States does not want, none of the governors, I think, wants them. So I think Guantanamo will rightly stay open, and it really should.
But Charlie, Trump's referring to all of them. Is that fair?
I'm not sure if he's referring to all of them. Well, the ones, remember, the ones that are there, we're you know, getting down to the baddest of the bad. You know, even George Bush was releasing prisoners once we, you know, had an understanding of either who they were or what their intentions were. They, you know, had promised to give up going back into battle. That said, even still, we had about a 30% recidivism rate. There are about 30% of those that have been released that are going back onto the battlefield. But we're getting down to the last few, and they are obviously the most dangerous of the lot. So I don't see it being possible. And again, I think what Donald Trump is saying is, I'd like to see it being used more than it has been. I wouldn't mind, where appropriate, refilling the place up.
Okay, so Muazzam, we're down to the baddest of the bad. You were clearly not from the baddest of the bad, so you were held without charge or trial and then released after 2 years. Do you agree with Charlie that we're down to sort of the A-list of the bad guys?
The thing is, the problem with all of these statements of the baddest of the bad or the worst of the worst or all these sorts of things, they are meaningless terms that are being used by the past and U.S. administrations to subject people to cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment and torture, to place them outside of the rule of law, and then say somehow that this is a necessity. Remember, President Bush said that all of the prisoners in Guantanamo were the worst of the worst. And in the end, the majority of us have been released. So if we were that bad, why are we free? It makes no sense, particularly now when Donald Trump is saying that these guys shouldn't be released. Like you said in the question, how does he know who's innocent and who's guilty? When you've not had any legal process at all, when several of the individuals, 23 of the 59 that remain there, even according to the administrative review boards, have said that they are cleared for release, meaning that they are essentially innocent. The only 10 that we know that are being charged, even under the U.S. Military Commission system, which has a very low standard of evidentiary procedure, there's only 10 people, which include, of course, as Charlie has said, and others, that those that were responsible or may have been responsible for 9/11. But what about the overwhelming majority? It's not just the 59 that are still there, but also what about the hundreds that were released without charge or trial?
Yep,
Guantanamo is a black stain on the history and the current state of the United States of America, and Donald Trump would do his best to use the rhetoric of the past and start saying we need to get rid of Guantanamo because it has brought nothing but infamy to the United States of America.
Okay, Charlie wants to come in. Charlie?
Well, I mean, the infamy charge doesn't bother me too much. I think what Machiavelli and the Prince said, better to be respected than loved. Prisoners are detained. This is something that's happened in every war since probably the dawn of time. Actually, before then, they used to just kill them. But when you have someone on the battlefield or that's a combatant, you have a right to detain them. And by the way, this is why these people are not getting tried. We constantly hear this in the narrative, with all due respect, of saying, was held for so many years without trial. Well, they're not being, they're not criminals per se. They are generally soldiers that have been taken off the field. Now, what's made Guantanamo or this war a little bit different is, we're not going to have, as in World War II, someone signing an article, an instrument of surrender on a battleship. So until we know that it's safe to let them go, there's a right to be detained. As for torture, again, I'll disagree. I'm sure it wasn't nice, and I'm sure you're going to perceive it to be torture, and that's fine, Mosem. I can respect that. But waterboarding was done, I think, on 3, maybe 4 people. It was done with a purpose. It worked, and I'd rather that. While everyone's complaining about the infamy of Guantanamo, we have a president who's happy to use Hellfire missiles and drones right now and just take people out. Now,
Charlie, allow me to come in for a second here, Charlie, allow me to come in for a second, because you talk about these men needing to be held there because of national security. Human Rights Watch, their senior National Security Council leader, Laura Pitter, wrote yesterday, U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's tweet yesterday that everyone held at Guantanamo Bay is extremely dangerous, is ill-informed. What's worse, his proposed course of action, stopping all releases, shows a lack of understanding about the danger keeping Guantanamo open poses to U.S. national security. She sees that as a threat to national security. This is a symbol of grievance around the world, particularly now with Daesh. Can't you see that?
No. I disagree. From what I've heard from security sources, is Guantanamo is not even mentioned if you listen to the chatter. There are still people, probably the Western press, funny enough, are the ones who are going to use these very old, out-of-date photos of guys in orange jumpsuits. The ones that are being held in good conditions. They're fed.
So you think that the fact that Daesh chains some of their victims, dresses them up in orange jumpsuits, shaves their heads, mimicking Guantanamo Bay, you think that has nothing to do with it whatsoever?
Oh, it's propaganda. It's done for propaganda's sake, you know, again, for the likes of the press, probably. But, you know, you have to do what's necessary when you're fighting a war for the security of your country. You can't go by what the rest of the world or the press thinks.
Okay, I know where you stand on that. Muazzam?
Let me just tell you that the so-called executioner Jihadi John waterboarded James Foley and others precisely because of this idea, this notion that the United States said that waterboarding is okay, therefore they can use waterboarding. And just let me to educate you and remind you that Japanese soldiers during World War II who waterboarded American POWs were prosecuted for war crimes. In Spanish, in its original Spanish, it's called tortura del agua. It is called torture of the water used during the Inquisition. To suggest that it's not torture is first a lie and a reinterpretation of history, and B, it's actually, all it's doing is causing the United States of America something far worse. And remember that Obama said that it was torture. He said that the consequence of the torture was the unintended coming out of organizations like IS, and that Trump has said that he would like to waterboard again. So waterboarding is a crime. It's a crime. And if you use it as a government, you should be prosecuted.
Muazzam, I have a final question for you here. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Recidivism. Charlie made a good point about recidivism, didn't he? Because the number of former Gitmo detainees confirmed or suspected of rejoining the jihad has grown to 208. That was according to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence just a few months ago. And you had more than 60% of them, 132 in total, were at large. Isn't that a legitimate fear that releasing some of these guys means that they end up fighting for Daesh possibly and blowing up innocents?
Let me just ask you a question. If we would apply the same logic to our criminal justice system and say, because of those people that are re-offend as a result of after being released from prison, we therefore will keep them in prison. Our prison would never be empty, and as a result of that, we'd have millions of people in prison forever just for a small little crime. This doesn't make any sense. In that term,
they're not prisoners.
And the second,
this is something different. This is they're being detained.
How do you determine recidivism based upon what I've read? Even me writing a book called Enemy Combatant was regarded as recidivism. The Tipton 3 from Britain did a film that was regarded as being hostile to the United States of America. You see, any speaking out against the United States of America is regarded as a hostile act. So I'm sorry, this catch-all of saying that everybody is a recidivist.
But I don't think anyone's going to honestly consider that recidivism.
If somebody's gone back to, for example, to Afghanistan, now that's a volatile place where there's fighting or is war already taking place. A person might be involved in hostilities to do with their region or the issues that concern their region. Now, the United States have said that they are all hostile to the United States of America. That's just factually incorrect. We need some more specifics and detail before you try to blanketly target the entire populace of Guantanamo and everybody who's there.
Charlie, if you can, 15 seconds, please, because I want to give you a word, but I've got to wrap.
Okay, just on the waterboarding issue, again, you can conflate things. What the Japanese did was wrong, and I'm not going to disagree with you, Mosem, but when it's done properly in the right mix and in the right fashion, we waterboard our own Marines as a form of training. It worked. It got the information that led to Bin Laden and his demise. So when used properly, I think one has to do what one has to do to keep your country safe.
Okay, this is one of those moments where. Okay.
You endorse torture, is that correct?
Okay, well, he doesn't consider it torture, and I think the two of you are going to disagree over this.
No, I'm endorsing enhanced interrogation.
This is one of those moments where I wish I had a longer show to work with. Unfortunately, I do not. I've got to wrap. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us.